Your leg snaps. Not a sprain, not a bruise. A full break, the kind that turns a shin bone into two separate objects connected only by skin. There is no ambulance coming. No hospital 30 minutes away. No morphine drip. Just you, the pain, and whatever the people around you happen to know. Here's the question worth sitting with. If this happened to you 30,000 years ago, would you survive it? Not just the injury, the weeks after, the infection risk, the immobility in a world where mobility was survival itself. You've probably pictured the answer already, and it's grim. A snapped bone in the deep past feels like a death sentence. No x-ray to check alignment. No cast. No antibiotics if the wound turns septic. Surely this was one of the most common ways a person's story simply ended. That assumption turns out to be wrong in a way that should change how you think about what these people actually knew. Start with the evidence, because this isn't speculation. It's written directly into bone. Paleopathologists, the researchers who study disease and injury in ancient skeletal remains, have spent decades documenting something remarkable. Fractures that healed. Not just healed, but healed with the bone ends properly aligned, fused back into something close to their original shape. One of the most cited examples comes from a Neanderthal skeleton known as Shanidar 1, excavated from Shanidar cave in Iraq. This individual sustained a catastrophic set of injuries, including a fractured arm bone so severe the limb may have been unusable for the rest of his life. And yet the bone shows clear signs of healing. He didn't die from that injury. He lived with it for years in a group that kept him alive. Sit with that for a second. Someone tens of thousands of years ago looked at a companion who could no longer hunt, carry, or fully contribute physically, and chose to keep feeding him anyway. That decision runs against almost everything popular imagination assumes about deep prehistory. The common picture is a world of constant, merciless scarcity, where anyone who couldn't pull their own weight got left behind, quietly, without ceremony. Shanidar 1's skeleton argues the opposite. His injuries were severe enough and old enough by the time he died that researchers studying the remains have suggested he may have been partially blind and significantly impaired in his mobility for a substantial portion of his adult life. None of that killed him. Something else did eventually, but not the injuries themselves, and not abandonment. But healing bone tells you survival happened. It doesn't tell you how. For that, researchers had to look somewhere stranger at a 5,000-year-old body pulled out of the ice. Ötzi, the mummified man discovered frozen in the Ötzi Alps in 1991, wasn't ancient by the standard of Shanidar, but his remarkably preserved body gave scientists something almost unheard of, a direct look at ancient medical practice, not just its outcome. Otzi's skin bore tattoos and patterns that cluster suspiciously close to joints affected by degenerative conditions, arthritis in his lower back, his knees, his ankles. Researchers studying these markings, including work published by teams examining his remains in detail, have proposed they functioned as a form of therapeutic treatment. Something closer to acupuncture than decoration, applied to exactly the places that would have hurt. This wasn't guesswork. This was pattern recognition, refined and passed down, applied with enough precision that a 5,000-year-old body still shows the exact placement centuries later. What makes this especially striking is the sheer number of these markings. Otzi has more than 50 tattoos across his body, and they are not scattered randomly or clustered in decorative visible locations the way you might expect from something meant to be seen and admired. They sit on his lower spine, behind his knee, around his ankles, places a fur wrap would have covered entirely. That placement pattern is exactly what you'd expect from treatment, not display. Nobody tattoos the back of their own ankle to look good to other people. You mark that spot because it hurts, and something about repeated puncturing in that exact location seemed to help. Now here's where the evidence gets genuinely strange, because bone setting itself left its own fingerprints, and researchers studying skeletal remains across multiple ancient sites have found something almost impossible to explain by luck alone: fractures that healed straight, not crooked, not fused at an awkward angle the way an untreated break typically does. Straight the way a bone heals when something held it rigid while it knitted back together. That detail matters more than it sounds like it should. A broken bone left completely alone doesn't heal in perfect alignment. It heals in whatever position gravity and movement happen to leave it. For a fracture to heal straight, someone had to actively immobilize it, hold the two ends in position and keep them there for weeks. Which means someone without any concept of germ theory or modern anatomy had already worked out that stillness plus alignment equals a working limb again. That's not primitive trial and error. That's applied biomechanical reasoning arrived at through generations of watching what worked and what didn't. So picture the actual moment, not the abstract concept of ancient medicine, but the specific scene. A hunter-gatherer campfire light flickering against a rock overhang. Someone's leg is bent wrong. Another person kneels beside them and with hands that have clearly done this before, begins wrapping something rigid. A split branch tied animal hide, strips tree bark around the break, pulling it snug enough that the leg can no longer shift. The specific detail that makes this real. The sharp resinous smell of fresh-cut bark mixing with wood smoke close enough to the injured person's face that it's the thing they remember afterward, more than the pain itself. There's no panic in this scene. There's procedure. Because this wasn't the first broken bone this group had ever seen and it wouldn't be the last. Here's the twist that should really land. You've probably assumed that primitive medicine meant desperate superstitious guessing, maybe a bit of chanting, maybe abandoning the injured person to fate. The archaeological record says otherwise. These groups were running something closer to a functioning, if unwritten, medical tradition built entirely on observation, refined over countless generations, and reliable enough that severely injured people regularly survived long enough for their bones to fully heal. This required something you might not expect from a hunter-gatherer band: sustained, costly cooperation. Someone with a broken leg couldn't hunt, couldn't gather, couldn't flee danger at full speed. For weeks, maybe months, that person was a net drain on group resources. And the group carried that cost anyway, because the alternative, letting an injured member die or be left behind, wasn't how these communities actually operated as often as the brutal survival of the fittest narrative suggests. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner's extensive fieldwork among the Juhuanzi people of the Kalahari, one of the most thoroughly documented hunter-gatherer societies studied by modern researchers, reveals networks of reciprocal obligation and care that stretch across enormous distances, built specifically to make sure no single person's bad luck, including injury, becomes an automatic death sentence. Wiesner documented gift and exchange relationships known locally as hexero, that function as a kind of insurance system spread across dozens of individuals in far-flung camps, so that when someone can't provide for themselves, there is already a standing obligation built over years for others to step in. This isn't a modern invention layered onto ancient people. It's a continuation of something almost certainly much older. Now bring it back to you, sitting wherever you're sitting with a phone in your pocket that can summon paramedics in minutes. You live inside a safety net so vast and automatic, you rarely have to think about it. Hospital splints manufactured to exact specifications, imaging technology that shows precisely how a bone is misaligned before anyone even touches it. You've probably never once had to wonder whether the people around you would carry the cost of keeping you alive through a slow, expensive recovery. That question has already been answered for you by institutions before you were ever born. That safety net didn't start with modern medicine. It started around a fire with someone kneeling beside an injured person, working out through trial memory and care what actually helped the bone heal straight. The equipment changed completely. The underlying instinct, the willingness to keep an injured person alive long enough to heal, apparently didn't. Your leg snaps. This time, you know something you didn't at the start. Somewhere behind every modern splint and cast is a lineage of hands that figured this out first with nothing but bark hide and thousands of years of paying close attention.